On our fourth anniversary, my husband Julian threw me a surprise divorce party. It came with a custom cake that had "Finally Free" piped in elegant script across the top. His friends actually cheered as he handed me a sheaf of papers and said, "Consider this your graduation from being a burden." I smiled, thanked everyone for coming, and signed the documents on the spot. But while they popped champagne to celebrate, I was signing something else, something that would turn their cheers into a faint, pathetic echo. I stood in the drizzle outside Oak Hill Cemetery, watching my husband Julian place a bouquet of white roses on his mother's headstone. He did it with the same theatrical flair he reserved for his big presentations at board meetings. Even in grief, he was putting on a show. The way he angled his head, the carefully measured pause he took before he spoke, the slight tremble in his voice that always seemed to appear just when a camera might be pointed his way. It was all a performance. "She would have been so proud of the empire we built together," he said, his voice carrying just enough to reach me across the manicured lawn. But we both knew there was no "we" in the empire that had been built. There was only Julian, basking in the spotlight, while I toiled away in the shadows. That morning had started just like any other in our penthouse, the one with marble floors that gleamed under the city's skyline. Sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, creating shifting patterns on surfaces that cost more than most people make. In a year, I moved through the space with the practiced ease of someone who had learned to make a life of luxury look effortless. The fresh orchids in the foyer needed a slight adjustment. My reflection needed one last check before I headed to a charity luncheon, where Julian would, once again, take credit for the culinary innovations I had dreamed up in the kitchen of our flagship restaurant, Aura. This routine, this elegant performance, had become suffocating. Every graceful gesture felt like adding another gold-plated bar to the cage I had built around myself without even realizing it. I wasn't Alara the innovator anymore, the creative mind that had turned a single restaurant into a sensation. I had been demoted to Alara the wife, the beautiful accessory that made Julian look more sophisticated, more complete. But standing there in that cemetery, watching him perform for his own deceased mother, something inside me finally hardened. This wasn't mourning. This was just another pitch, another chance for Julian to sell the world on his supposed depth of character. It hit me then that our entire marriage had been his most ambitious project yet. He'd married the woman who could build him an empire, all while letting him slap his name on her blueprint. The memory of my father Arthur's warnings came rushing back with a painful clarity. It was 4 years ago in his study that always smelled of old books and good whiskey. He'd been adamant about an unusual clause in the prenuptial agreement. 70% of all assets would go to me if Julian initiated a divorce or was unfaithful. Arthur's weathered hands, the hands of a man who'd spent decades navigating the treacherous waters of business, had tightened around his glass as he tried to explain his gut feeling about charming men who marry for ambition, not for love. "Alara," he had said, his voice heavy with experience, "men like Julian see a business opportunity where the rest of us see romance. Promise me you'll sign this." I was 27 and I had brushed off his concerns. As the paranoia of an old-fashioned, overprotective father, I was sure I had found genuine love. The night before our wedding, sitting in my childhood room surrounded by silk and promises, I decided to look over the contract one last time just to fully grasp what I was agreeing to. But when I woke up the next morning, the papers were gone. Julian had just laughed it off with that disarming charm that had hooked me from the moment we met. "Oh, lawyers and their endless paperwork," he'd said, adjusting his tie in the mirror. "Don't you worry, darling. We have a lifetime to figure out the little details. A lifetime." The word tasted like ash in my mouth now, as I watched him meticulously straighten the roses on the grave. How could I have been so naive? To think that a man who calculated every single word, every gesture, every public appearance would leave something as critical as his financial future to pure chance. The disappearing prenup wasn't an accident. It was his first move in a very long game. While Julian was busy networking at galas and posing for magazine covers that celebrated our restaurants, I was spending my nights in the kitchen of Aura with our head chef, Leo Rossi. Together, we were the ones crafting the menus that were turning our restaurant into a culinary powerhouse. I was the one negotiating with suppliers to get the best quality while keeping us profitable. I was the one poring over customer feedback and creating the wine pairings that critics were raving about. Every single innovation, every creative leap, every strategic move that fueled our success, I documented it all. I kept detailed journals hidden away in our home office. The sustainable sourcing program that brought in eco-conscious diners, that was mine. The staff training protocols that created the impeccable service everyone talked about, mine. The seasonal menus that kept food bloggers coming back again and again, all mine. My fingerprints were all over every single part of our empire, yet I had willingly remained invisible. I had told myself it was just for a little while, that Julian would eventually give me the public credit I deserved. But the months bled into years, and I came to realize he never had any intention of sharing the stage. In his world, I was the supportive wife who gave him a few good ideas, not the architect who had designed the entire structure from the ground up. The irony was almost too much to bear. While Julian was schmoozing with investors, I was the one building real relationships with suppliers who respected my knowledge, and I was creating the systems that would allow us to scale our concept into the multi-location empire I dreamed of. Yet, whenever a business magazine wanted to do a profile on our success, Julian was always the only one in the photograph, the lone genius. Watching him in that cemetery, his performance hitting its crescendo with a perfectly timed moment of silent, somber reflection, I felt a seismic shift inside me. The woman who had spent 4 years making herself smaller, quieter, and more agreeable was finally waking up to a truth she had tried so hard to ignore. Our marriage wasn't a partnership. It was a hostile takeover, dressed up in a wedding gown and sealed with vows Julian never meant to keep. The rain started coming down harder, and Julian glanced at our car with the same look he got when he was deciding if a networking event was still worth his time. Even his grief had an expiration date. "We should go," he said, his voice already back to normal, the theatrical tremor gone as if it had been washed away by the rain. "The car will get soaked." As we walked back to the gates, his phone started buzzing. I knew it would be business calls, messages from investors, or congratulations on our latest glowing review. He smiled as he read them, wearing that look of satisfaction he got when everything was going according to his plan. But what he didn't know was that his plan had never truly included me as an equal. I was just a resource to be managed, a talent to be exploited, a name to be borrowed until I was no longer useful. That prenup, the one that had vanished, wasn't just missing paperwork. It was the moment Julian had decided that his ambition was more important than my security, and his success was more important than my trust. The rain kept falling as we got in the car, and I realized the storm outside was nothing compared to the one that was about to break inside of me. The drive home was silent. Julian was glued to his phone, and I just stared out at the rain-streaked city lights. By the time we reached our building, the storm had become a downpour, turning the November evening into a dark, cold blur. Julian rushed inside ahead of me, eager to get back to whatever messages had been so demanding of his attention. I followed behind, the click of my heels echoing in the massive, empty entryway. The house felt different, though I couldn't quite put my finger on why. Or maybe it was me who was different. Maybe that silent conversation I'd had with myself in the cemetery had changed the way I saw everything, including this home we supposedly shared. Julian went straight into his study, claiming he had urgent calls to make. I could hear his voice through the door, animated and energetic in a way it never was when he talked to me about our life or our future. The contrast was a slap in the face as I stood alone in our living room, surrounded by furniture that felt like it belonged entirely to him. The next morning, I had a scheduled meeting with our produce suppliers, a routine negotiation that Julian never bothered with. It was too in the weeds for him, too operational for a man who preferred the glamour of high-stakes lunches. I drove to the warehouse district and spent 2 hours with Maria Santos, a vendor who had been with us since the beginning. "Your husband, he doesn't get food like you do," Maria said as we inspected a crate of winter squash. "When he comes, he talks about numbers. When you come, you talk about the customer, about making something special." Her words stuck with me all the way home. Julian saw spreadsheets and profit margins. He never saw the experience, the memories we were helping create. That vision had always been mine alone. I got home earlier than I'd planned. The house was empty, Julian's car gone from its spot. He must have been at one of his networking events, charming some new investor while taking credit for my work. His phone was sitting on the kitchen island, buzzing over and over. That was strange. Julian was surgically attached to that phone. The screen lit up with a series of notifications from someone named Chloe, marketing. I didn't know the name, but he was always meeting with consultants. The messages looked urgent, something about schedules and plans. My first instinct was to call him, but as I picked up the phone, the screen unlocked, and I saw it all. The messages laid out months of secret dinners, weekend trips to places he'd told me were business conferences, and detailed plans for a future that didn't include me. My hands started to shake as I scrolled through their conversation. Chloe called me his naive little wife, who had no clue what was really going on. Julian replied with a comment about how relieved he was that the prenup was no longer an issue, both of them assuming I had unknowingly signed away my rights 4 years ago. They were planning his divorce from me like it was a corporate merger, complete with timelines and exit strategies. The phone fell from my hand, its clatter on the granite countertop echoing like a gunshot through the silent house. I stared at the screen, still glowing with the proof of his betrayal, and felt something inside me break and then reset into something cold and hard. I had always thought I was a good judge of character. It's what made me good at business. But I had been completely blind to the rot in my own home. The man I had built an empire for was secretly planning to tear my life down. That night, after Julian came home with a flimsy excuse about a client meeting running late, I waited until he was asleep. Then I went into his private study. The room was his sanctuary, filled with awards he hadn't earned, and photos of him shaking hands with important people. I had never gone through his things before. I thought our marriage was built on trust, but trust was a luxury I could no longer afford. I started methodically, going through his files. He was obsessively organized. In the bottom drawer of his antique desk, behind a stack of financial reports, I found a false panel, and behind that panel lay the truth. There was the original prenuptial agreement my father had insisted on, with Julian's signature on it. The line for my signature was completely blank, but that wasn't all. There were statements from offshore bank accounts, deeds for properties purchased in his name only, and a formal proposal to sell Aura to a massive hotel conglomerate. Every document was another layer of his calculated betrayal. He hadn't just been cheating on me. He'd been systematically setting himself up to steal the entire empire I had built. Planning to leave me with nothing, I sat there in his expensive leather chair, surrounded by the evidence of his deception, and felt the last bit of warmth in my chest turn to ice. The woman who had made herself small for 4 years was finally seeing the full picture. Julian had never seen me as a partner. I was a resource to be used up and thrown away. The empire we had supposedly built together was really just my creation, and he was the parasite who had been feeding on it while planning his escape. I took out my phone and photographed every single page, every document, every signature. Then I put everything back exactly as I had found it. Julian would wake up the next morning feeling safe and secure, completely unaware that his wife had finally seen him for who he truly was. The next night, I was at Aura, doing inventory with Leo in the quiet aftermath of dinner service. Leo had been with me from day one. his hands turning my culinary concepts into art. "Mrs. Alara," he said, pausing over the wine list, "we all know who the real boss is around here." His words hung in the air, an unspoken truth I wasn't sure I was ready to face. "If you ever need anything," he added quietly, "proof, a witness, anything at all, you have our loyalty." I looked at him and realized everyone, the entire staff, had seen the truth about Julian all along. They had been quietly protecting the restaurant from his bad ideas and documenting his failures. I wasn't alone. Leo's words gave me the strength I needed. The knowledge that my staff was on my side was a validation I desperately needed. I wasn't crazy. Other people saw his deception too, but just knowing wasn't enough. I needed a plan. The next 6 months were an exercise in masterful deception. Every morning, I woke up next to the man who was actively betraying me and played the part of the perfect devoted wife. I'd go to board meetings and watch Julian present my sustainable sourcing initiatives as his own brilliant idea, and I would just nod supportively while secretly taking photos of his slides for my growing file of evidence. The investor lunches were the most surreal. Julian would walk potential partners through Aura, explaining the kitchen workflow I designed, the service standards I implemented. He'd say it all with such conviction. Sometimes I wondered if he'd actually convinced himself that my ideas were his. "Alara has been a tremendous help in executing my vision," he would say, gesturing to me with a patronizing little smile. And I would just smile back, playing the part, all while building my case. The hardest part was dealing with his family, especially his sister Claire. She always treated me with a barely hidden contempt. At holiday dinners, she would go on and on about Julian's business genius, while dismissing my role as just being helpful. "You're so lucky you married someone with Julian's entrepreneurial spirit," she told me once, and I just smiled and agreed, knowing full well his spirit consisted mostly of stealing my work. In the meantime, I started cultivating a relationship with Sofia Vargas, a venture capitalist Julian had been trying to impress for months. She had initially been interested in Aura, but a meeting with Julian, where he couldn't answer any real operational questions, had cooled her interest. But Sofia saw me at a conference and recognized me from the magazine photos. She started asking me questions, real questions about the menu, the wine pairings, things Julian knew nothing about. "You have the mind of a true restaurateur," she told me over one of our research lunches. "You understand the fundamentals that create real, sustainable success." Coming from her, it meant something. When she offered to back any future projects I might have, I knew she was investing in me, not in Julian's carefully crafted image. My late-night talks with Leo revealed just how much the staff had been doing to protect the restaurant. They had been keeping detailed logs. Whenever Julian gave an order that contradicted mine, they would document it and then follow my instructions. Patricia, our sommelier, had a whole file on Julian's cluelessness about wine. The servers had their own records of his inability to even explain the dishes on the menu he supposedly created. All of this together built an ironclad case proving I was the true force behind Aura's success. Working with my lawyer, David, I began the process of legally protecting my work. The recipes, the management systems. I started filing trademarks and patents, all under my name. We used my detailed journals to prove my creations predated any of Julian's public claims. He thought he owned an empire. He was about to find out that every valuable piece of it was legally mine. As winter turned into spring, my double life became my new normal. By day, I was the supportive wife. By night, I was a general, preparing for war. Julian remained completely oblivious, convinced my days revolved around picking out new curtains. It was an assumption that was about to cost him everything. Julian's grand plan, his final psychological blow, was about to be revealed. The invitation came on a Thursday morning, delivered by a courier in a thick cream-colored envelope. The gold-embossed letters just said, An evening of celebration, without specifying what. I figured it was another one of his charity galas. The timing was strange, though. Julian usually planned these things weeks in advance. This felt spontaneous, impulsive, which wasn't like him at all. I picked out a classic navy dress and practiced my social smile, getting ready for another night of being his lovely accessory. The performance was getting exhausting, but I had to keep it up just a little longer. Saturday night arrived, unseasonably warm. When I walked through our front door, I expected to see the usual mix of business associates and investors. But the vibe was all wrong. It was too personal, too celebratory. Julian's friends and family were all there, and they were all looking at me with this weird, excited energy. The moment I walked in, the conversations hushed, replaced by knowing looks and little smirks that made my skin crawl. His sister Claire came right up to me, giving me a hug that lasted way too long. "This is going to be such a memorable night, Alara," she whispered. "I hope you're ready for a few surprises." There was a venom in her voice that was impossible to miss. I moved through the party, and everyone I greeted responded with this over-the-top fake enthusiasm. It was like they were all actors in a play, and I was the only one who didn't have the script. And then I saw her. Chloe. She was standing by the bar, sipping champagne like she owned the place. She was nodding at guests who clearly knew exactly who she was. She wasn't a marketing director. She was Julian's mistress, and she was here to watch the show. The realization hit me so hard, I had to grab onto a table to steady myself. Every single person in this room was in on it. They were here to watch my public humiliation. Julian appeared at my side, his hand on my back in a gesture that now felt like a leash. "Darling, you look incredible," he said. "So glad you could make it to our little celebration." "What exactly are we celebrating, Julian?" I asked, my voice miraculously steady. "Patience," he purred, his eyes gleaming. "You'll see." At exactly 8:30, the staff wheeled out a massive cake. It was beautiful, 3 tiers of white frosting. But as it got closer, I could read the writing, "Finally free." My blood ran cold. This wasn't a party. It was an execution. Claire stepped forward and raised her glass. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced to the suddenly silent room, "tonight we celebrate new beginnings and the courage to cut dead weight from our lives to freedom." The room erupted in cheers and applause. I was frozen, surrounded by people I had thought of as family, all of them celebrating my destruction. Julian walked toward me, holding an elegantly wrapped gift box. "Alara, darling," he said, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. "I have a little graduation gift for you." My hands were shaking as I opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of tissue paper, were divorce papers, already filed, already stamped. "Consider this your graduation from being a burden," Julian announced, and the room roared with laughter. He had planned every single detail to break me in front of this audience. He wanted to paint himself as the victim, finally free from the wife who was holding him back. But as I stared at those papers, something unexpected happened. I didn't feel devastated. I felt liberated. Not in the way he meant. In a much more dangerous way, he had just made the biggest mistake of his life, and he was too arrogant to even see it. The divorce papers felt impossibly light in my hands. Julian stood there, soaking in the applause, waiting for me to shatter. He wanted tears. He wanted a dramatic collapse. What he didn't expect was for the mask I had worn for 4 years to fall away, revealing the woman he had so badly underestimated. The tears he was hoping for never came. Instead, a wave of cold, sharp clarity washed over me. I looked at the official seals on the documents, realizing he'd been planning this ambush for months, but he had made a fatal error. He assumed humiliating me would leave me broken and grateful for whatever scraps he threw my way. He didn't understand that every person laughing in this room was now a witness to his calculated cruelty. I picked up a pen from a nearby table and signed the papers with a steady hand. Every stroke of the pen felt like a declaration of war. The room watched, fascinated, as I completed the paperwork. "There," I said, meeting Julian's eyes. "It's done." There was no pleading in my voice, no desperation, just finality. A flicker of confusion crossed Julian's face, but it was quickly replaced by triumph. "I knew you'd be practical about this, Alara," he said. Practical. Even now, he had to diminish me. The party went on, a celebration of my demise. I moved through the crowd, accepting fake condolences, my mind already 10 steps ahead. As the night wore on, Chloe grew more confident, openly discussing her plans to redecorate their house. The last guests left around midnight, leaving a mess of champagne glasses and cake crumbs. Julian and Chloe disappeared upstairs, their laughter echoing through the house. I sat alone in the living room, surrounded by the wreckage of my public execution. The cruelty had been so meticulously planned. Rebecca's toast, the cake, the guest list, all of it designed to inflict maximum pain, but his need for an audience had been his undoing. He had just handed me everything I needed. He had legally terminated our marriage under the exact conditions that triggered the clause in the prenup he thought didn't exist. I pulled out my phone and dialed my lawyer. David answered on the second ring. "David," I said, my voice cold and clear, "it's time. Execute the plan." The words felt like a shot of adrenaline. For months, I had been playing a role. Tonight, Julian had given me my cue. "I'll start the filings first thing Monday morning," David replied. "Are you sure you're ready?" "I've never been more ready for anything in my life," I said. As soon as I hung up, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Leo Heard what happened. "Are you okay?" Then a voicemail from Sofia Vargas, the VC. "Alara, whatever you need, just call." Within hours, the people who actually knew my worth were reaching out. While Julian had been curating an audience of sycophants, I had been building an army of allies. My phone kept buzzing all night. Suppliers, industry contacts, people who respected my work. It was a powerful reminder of something Julian had never understood. Reputation isn't built at cocktail parties. It's built through competence and respect. He thought he had won. He had no idea he'd just declared war on a woman who was more than prepared for battle. As the sun came up, I realized the woman who had signed those divorce papers was gone. In her place was someone who understood the difference between being underestimated and being undervalued, and she was ready to prove that Julian's empire had never been his at all. Monday morning was a symphony of perfectly executed legal maneuvers. I sat in my kitchen sipping coffee as the sun rose, knowing Julian was asleep upstairs with Chloe, oblivious to the fact that his entire world was collapsing. At exactly 9 a.m., the first wave hit. Automated bank transfers, property deeds transferring, investment accounts freezing. 70% of everything he thought was his was moving into accounts he couldn't touch, all protected by the prenup he thought I'd never signed. The second wave was aimed at his ego. Every innovation he'd ever claimed as his was now legally and officially mine. The patents, the trademarks for the recipes and management systems that made Aura a success, all filed and documented under my name. He would try to run his business and find out he no longer owned the ideas that made it run. My phone buzzed. It was David. Transfers complete, accounts secured. He's locked out. Then another call came in. It was Sofia Vargas. "Alara, the news is already flying around the industry. My consortium is ready to make an offer on Julian's remaining 35%. I suspect he'll be a very motivated seller. Within 48 hours, his desperate need for cash would force him to sell his remaining shares, and Sofia's group would acquire them and sign them directly over to me." By noon, I walked into Aura as its sole owner. I went straight to the kitchen. The staff went silent when they saw me. "I have some news," I said. "As of this morning, I am the 100% owner of this restaurant." For a second, there was silence. Then Leo started clapping. Soon, the whole kitchen erupted in cheers. There were tears of relief. They knew what it would have been like to work under Julian's full control. What about Mr. Julian? Patricia, our sommelier, asked Mr. Julian will be pursuing other opportunities, I said. An hour later, Julian's BMW screeched into the parking lot. I watched on the security monitor as he strode in, still believing he owned the place. He was met by Leo, who calmly explained the new ownership structure. The color drained from Julian's face. He stormed into my office. "Victoria, we need to talk about this rationally," he started, using the condescending tone he always took with me. "I know you're upset, but you can't take away my dream." "This was never your dream, Julian," I said, my voice ice cold. "It was my life's work. You were just the face I let it wear." I spread the documents on the desk in front of him, my journals, the development notes, the proof of his fraud. As he stared at the evidence, his phone buzzed. It was Chloe, calling to tell him she was out. The woman who had cheered on my humiliation was abandoning him the second the money disappeared. He just sat there, a broken man. I reached into a drawer and pulled out an envelope, placing it on the desk. "I have a proposition for you," I said. "Given your current financial situation, I'm prepared to offer you a job." He looked up, stunned. "A job? At my own restaurant?" "At what was never your restaurant," I corrected him. "I'm offering you a position as an assistant manager. You'll report to Leo." The choice was simple: humiliating employment or complete ruin. His hand trembled as he took the pen. What I thought was the end of my revenge was actually just the beginning. My first act as sole owner was to promote the people who had actually earned it. Leo became executive chef and a part owner. Patricia was made beverage director. The servers who had memorized my menus were given promotions and real career paths. The culture of the restaurant transformed overnight. But the biggest transformation was Julian. A week later, he showed up for his first shift in a standard server's uniform. Watching him clear tables and restock napkins under Leo's patient supervision was a satisfaction money could never buy. He was finally learning the business he had claimed to have built. "He's learning," Leo told me diplomatically. "It's a big adjustment, going from claiming expertise to actually developing it." Some customers who recognized him were awkward, but Julian handled it with a surprising amount of grace. He was experiencing the invisibility he had forced on me and so many others, and for the first time in his life, he was creating value with his own two hands. 6 months later, Aura was nominated for its first James Beard Award. The nomination specifically cited our sustainable dining practices, the programs I had developed while Julian was taking the credit. Reading the letter was a vindication that went beyond personal pride. The night of the awards, I attended with Leo and Patricia. Our table represented real collaboration. Julian, meanwhile, was back at the restaurant, working his shift. The symmetry was perfect. The award itself didn't matter as much as what it represented. The restaurant was finally reaching its true potential under authentic leadership. Later that week, I was in my office reviewing expansion plans when I glanced at the security monitor. I saw Julian in the dining room carefully polishing wine glasses, following the exact technique a junior staffer had taught him. He was finally making an honest contribution. My ultimate victory wasn't in destroying him. It was in revealing the truth. The empire he thought he lost had never belonged to him in the first place. I had simply taken back what was always mine and stepped into the light where I belonged. If this story of calculated justice had you captivated from beginning to end, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Alara signed those divorce papers with steady hands, transforming Julian's intended humiliation into her declaration of war. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more compelling stories of triumph and transformation. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. End of story.